All rise. Veuillez vous lever. Please be seated.
Mr. McCluskey, please proceed.
Thank you. The murder operation. The summary execution of over 7,000 Muslim men and boys and the operation to expel the women and children, 11 to 13 July, were fundamentally one major undertaking with two interconnected operations, what I refer to as the forcible transfer operation and the murder operation, both designed to dispose the entire Srebrenica population, which we have defined in the indictment as the JCE, to eliminate. Now, we speak about these operations separately, but as you know from all the evidence, they are so intertwined and together, especially on the 12th and 13th of July, that they must be viewed as one. That is the foundation of the JCE, to eliminate. For the purpose of my argument today, I've divided the prosecution case into 4 chapters. The first, the mass executions of over 7,000 able-bodied men from 13 through 23 July and beyond. The second, the evidence identifying the perpetrators of these crimes, exclusively VRS and MUP officers acting under the command of Ratko Mladić. And third, the presence, conduct, actions of General Mladić from 11 July through 17 July, commanding the units both from the ground and from Belgrade. These 3 chapters themselves form the foundation of proving Mladić's criminal responsibility. But there's more, and what is largely part of Chapter 3, I call Chapter 4. It's where I take you through some of the most compelling evidence specifically identifying Mladić's involvement in the planning, ordering, and overseeing the mass murders. The defense appear to acknowledge, to some degree, that large-scale murders occurred during the key time frame. They, however, suggest that our murder victims' numbers are inflated, that there are battle casualties in the mass graves, but for the most part, there is no serious defense challenging the mass murders. The defense agree with the prosecution to some extent that Beara and Popovich and other security officers were significantly involved in those murders. They seem to suggest in their closing brief that Krstić was also involved, which we agree. Krstić played a major role in these crimes. Also, I understand the defense fundamentally agree with the prosecution regarding Mladić's whereabouts from 11 July through the evening of 6 July, and I believe
6 July?
I'm sorry, to the evening of 16 July, excuse me. And I believe they agree that Mladić was on duty in Bosnia on 11 July through the afternoon of 14 July when he crossed over the border into Serbia. However, the defense impossibly leave Mladić and his troops out of the crimes, arguing that he had no knowledge and no involvement in the mass murders, and neither did his VRS or police forces, except for a few security officers. Thus, the most significant issues of disagreement are the identities of the perpetrators of the murder operation and Mladić's command of the murder operation and his links and connection to it. The defense military expert concluded the murders were committed by, and I quote, self-organized paramilitary groups from Podrinje, coming from pre-war criminal milieu, as well as by groups of avengers, probably committed in cooperation with some officers from security structures. It's at D1661, page 232. And with no other involvement from the VRS or MOOP forces under Mladić's command, despite our prodding on cross-examination of who are these people, who did it. And that, despite being on duty in and around the places where the crimes were committed, Mladić was unaware and uninvolved with any of these forces and the crimes they supposedly committed. So first, the mass executions. The evidence of the crimes is overwhelming. It came to you firsthand, in most cases from survivors themselves, and in many cases executioners who shared the same ground as those they murdered. This was backed up by forensic crime scene investigation, aerial imagery, vehicle records, witnesses, exhumations of all the known mass graves from Srebrenica, connecting all the primary graves, primary disturbed mass graves, to all the secondary graves. As of today, we've identified almost 6,000 murder victims from mass graves, and with so many people still missing, we expect the final number of murdered is over 7,000 people. I saw no significant defense challenge to our major executions in mass grave evidence, as I mentioned, challenging only the Jadar River and Srpska executions, the murder of the Mladić patients, and arguing the Kravica mass murders were merely revenge-based on killing of a MOOP soldier by a Muslim prisoner. I will rely on our brief for the detailed analysis of those cases, but I do want to remind you of some of the key points. You'll remember the evidence of the Jadar River murders. We've spent a fair amount of time with them and the witnesses and in the 98 bis arguments. I thus refer you to our closing brief, paragraphs 1426 to 1435. But remember the survivor, RM314, his testimony, his demeanor, all the corroborating and supporting evidence, where he was captured, taken to a river, shot, fell in the river, washed downstream, and escaped. The defense twists the meaning of the Latin term used in his medical report, the term vulna explosiva. They try to argue that it means it's a shrapnel wound. However, the evidence at trial has clearly shown that that's not the case. The term describes the victim's wound and does not refer to the cause of the wound. We hear that from the doctors in their reports. Regarding Srpska, the murder of 150 men from Srebrenica. Though we don't have a survivor of that execution, the witnesses, forensic evidence, and evidence of the 17 July sweep operation ordered by Mladić to Kasarevic proves that the 150 Muslims captured in the sweep operation on 17 July were executed at Srpska on 17 or 18 July. See our brief at paragraphs 1341 to 1347 and 1540 to 1545. The crux of the Srpska issue lies in determining the date Kasarevic received the order from Mladić to conduct the sweep operation. We've proven that Mladić gave Kasarevic this order on the night of 16 July, after Mladić returned from Belgrade. As such, the murders of the 150 victims at Srpska was the direct result of Mladić's order. While Kasarevic resisted confirming his previous testimony that he received the order on 16 July, he did not waver from his account that he received that order personally from Mladić the night before he departed to Bratunac. We have proven that Kasarevic traveled to Bratunac on the 17th of July, thus proving he received the order from Mladić and Crna Rijeka the night of the 16th, all of which ties Mladić directly to the murders at Srpska. Remember the young boy that was gathered up in the sweep operation on the 17th. He identified people he knew that were later found among the 150 at Srpska. And those people were killed as a result of the order of the sweep operation, which happened right in the center of the murder operation time period. As for Kravica, this is a complex situation with several different forms of interlocking evidence. You remember the mass murder of some 800 to 1,000 people in the Kravica warehouse not long after Mladić had left the Sandici meadow, maybe an hour or two. The evidence is from survivors, MOOP witnesses, video transcripts, careful recreation by Mr. Błaszczyk, and more. We have thoroughly analyzed this, and due to its complexity, I can't get into it with you today. But please take a look at the brief. I do want you to consider 2 or 3 things, though. You should note that both the defense and the prosecution appear to agree that a Muslim prisoner took a rifle from a MOOP guard and killed him, whereupon another MOOP soldier grabbed the barrel of the Muslim's rifle, burning his hands as he took it away. The basic difference is that the defense argued that the shooting of the MOOP soldier started the killing spree, whereas it's the prosecution's case that this incident was an organized execution pursuant to orders, with the burned hands incident happening well after the executions had begun, and it was a desperate response by a Muslim man to the executions around him, not how they started. So the key to unlocking Kravica is understand the evidence that shows burned hands could only have happened around the east side of the warehouse, many minutes after the killing started at the west side of the warehouse. This can be seen from evaluating the 2 survivor witnesses, RM-256, who was in the west room, and RM-274, who was in the east room, and a careful review of the video of Borovchinin arriving at the scene, remembering he wasn't too far away when he hurried there straight after getting the report about burned hands. Now, like all survivors in this situation, their accounts have differences, but the similarities and connections are much stronger than those few differences. And when combined with all the evidence, it's obvious that burned hands did not start this execution. For our analysis of the murders of the Mladić patients, please refer to our brief 1375 to 1378, where we carefully explain the evidence that shows that Popovich removed 10 seriously injured Muslims from the Zvornik Brigade on 23 July. And they have never been seen since. And we had their names and their medical documents clearly identifying who those people are. There's no question that once Popovich had them in his hands on the 23rd, the man that authored the Bishina executions that same day, that they were taken out and killed. But back to the overall case. As I said, aside from the crimes I've just mentioned above, the defense and their experts have not significantly challenged the major execution sites, as far as I can tell. Perhaps we'll hear something new next week, suggesting only that some of the people exhumed from the mass graves were battle casualties. There is, in fact, no evidence that anyone but murder victims were placed in the graves at Braniewo Farm, Kozluk, Petkovsky Dam, Orahovac, and all the secondary graves coming from those enormous graves. Only the grave at Glogova contained the victims who died in unknown circumstances, such as combat, murder, or other means that we don't know about. As you know, Glogova was used, it was along the road, and it's impossible to know how many bodies were along that road and died in ways that we don't know. We do know that Glogova contained all the bodies of the 800 to some thousand murder victims from Kravica warehouse, and those murdered in the schools in Bratunac, well over 50. Though the precise numbers and the circumstances, as I mentioned, are impossible to determine. We did our best in the brief to lay this out for you. So not only is there no evidence supporting the defense claim of battle casualties in the graves, there's really no reason whatsoever the VRS would have used the valuable men and resources to undertake such a project. The areas of conflict were remote, densely wooded, largely inaccessible areas, which of course reflects the route the column took to avoid Serb forces. Bodies in these remote areas pose no significant threat or health hazard worth risking men and materials for. The woods were not only dense and inaccessible, but contained desperate Muslims trapped there after the fall of Srebrenica. Some of them were armed. There were also mines in those woods. There was a terrible threat for anyone going there. Finally, the mass graves were far away from the conflict area. Orahovac was the closest, some 5 kilometers, but even then, the terrain was very difficult. There's no reason on earth you would go look for harmless bodies and pull them with masses of trucks and resources all the way out to these places. I won't show you the map. You know the places, the distance. It's absurd. This defense is unsupported, completely unreasonable, and should be rejected. Okay, chapter 2. The forces committing these crimes. Throughout the Srebrenica section of their brief, the defense conclude Colonel Beara, Lieutenant Colonel Popovich, Momir Nikolic, and Drago Nikolic played major roles in organizing and implementing the murder operation. On this point, we fundamentally agree. However, after somewhat acknowledging Beara's and Popovich's involvement, the defense goes completely off the rails and state that the murders, as I have said, were not conducted by Mladić forces, but self-organized paramilitary groups and groups of avengers whose family members had been killed. These words from the expert Kovac are more words of desperation and defensiveness than anything resembling credible evidence or argument. There is no evidence whatsoever that people resembling this description played any role in the murder operation or were even present in the area. When asked in cross-examination to identify such a group, Kovac could only identify the Scorpions. That's it, transcript 41855. However, remember how much time we spent with the material there. You have seen the VRS documents, map graphics, and other evidence showing the Scorpions were a Serbian MUP unit engaged in combat in the SRK zone of responsibility, resubordinated to the VRS and under the command of the Sarajevo Romagna Corps. There's a key document, and its number has escaped me in my brief, but I remember Dragomir Milosevic says our forces in the top of it, and he lists the wounding of Scorpions. I think some even were killed that day in July. That is in our brief. And the Scorpions. I'm not going to show you that awful video, but please take care here. Sometimes, because that video is so clear and the Muslims are so obviously from Srebrenica, we have not laid out the facts and the details of that crime as much as we should have. We have now. But this needs to be done to fully understand that this was part of the murder operation, part of the JCE to eliminate. The evidence of the actual officers, units, and troops taking part in the murder operation from 13 July onwards is clearly set out in our closing brief. So I'm going to summarize for you here, and even that gets a little tedious because there's so many VRS people, but I need to remind you of them. In and around Potocari, commanding the forces, were Mladić, Krstić, Borovčanin, with Popović, Momir Nikolić, Petar Salapora, Radoslav Janković, Kosarić, implementing the operation, using soldiers and officers of the Bratanac Brigade, including military police, RS MUP, special police, officers of the 65th Protection Regiment, members of the 10th Sabotage Detachment, and others. In Bratanac, from 11 through 13 July, Mladić was present, together with Krstić, Jivanović, Popović, Borovčanin, Radoslav Janković, and all of the Drina Corps brigade commanders taking part in the attack on Srebrenica, including Pandorović, Blagojević, Furtula, Trivić, and others. In the Zvornik area, Deputy Commander of the Zvornik Brigade, Dragan Obrenović, played a key role in the events, as did Vinko Pandorović when he returned from the Žepa battle on 15 July. The brigade duty officers from 14 through 17 July were heavily involved in organizing the executions with the commands of the 4th Battalion in Orahovac, the 6th Battalion in Petkovci, the 2nd Battalion in Ročević, and the 1st Battalion in Pilica. The officers, soldiers, and units involved in the Zvornik area murders are too numerous to name here. The defense failure to acknowledge this enormous body of evidence of direct VRS and MUP involvement highlight how desperate and unreasonable the defense case truly is. Perhaps they will come up with something that we'll hear next week. Okay, chapter 3. The presence of Mladić in and around Srebrenica, Bratanac, and Zvornik areas at various times between 11 July and the afternoon of 14 July is not contested by the defense. The evidence is, of course, overwhelming from witnesses, documents, intercepts, and especially video of Mladić in Srebrenica on the 11th of July, at the Hotel Fontana on the 11th and 12th of July, and in Potocari on the 12th of July, to name some of the sources. All of this evidence clearly shows Mladić in uniform, on duty, in command, exercising command. The idea that Krstić was in command was thoroughly debunked by Mr. Teager, and I won't go over that in specifics. The defense suggests in their brief at paragraph 643, when present at the Corps command post, Mladić could only offer advice to the Corps commander and could not overrule the Corps commander's authority. That's what Mr. Teager was speaking to when he debunked it. And outlined well how the chain of command worked and Mladić's role in it. I won't go any farther into it. So, chapter 4. And now this takes me to the evidence linking Mladić to the creation, ordering, and implementation of the murder operation. We begin, as we have before, with Mladić's now famous words, uttered at about 5:30 p.m. on 11 July during his walk through Srebrenica town. This is P1147.
Evo nas 11. jula 1995. godine u srpskoj Srebrenici. Uoči još jednog velikog praznika srpskoga, poklanjamo srpskom narodu ovaj grad i napokon došao je trenutak da se posle bune protiv Dahija Turcima osvetimo na ovom prostoru.
The time has come to take revenge upon the Turks in this region. These words must be taken seriously, for within 6 days of their utterance, Mladić's officers and men murdered over 7,000 Muslim able-bodied men and boys. Now let's go to the evening of 11 July and the first meeting with the Dutchbat at the Hotel Fontana. I want to draw your attention to significant moments at the Hotel Fontana that should help reveal Mladić's intentions and strategies and his decision to murder the able-bodied men of Srebrenica on the evening of 11 July or the morning of 12 July. During the first meeting at the Hotel Fontana on 11 July, Mladić intimidated Karamins and his officers and threatened them with references to death and other vulgarities. You've seen that. I won't play that for you again. Previously, we've asked you to consider this evidence to show that there was no negotiation at the Hotel Fontana and that Mladić was in complete control, intimidating everyone. This remains the case, but I would also like to focus you this time on the words of Colonel Karamins in response to Mladić. So, after screaming and threatening the Dutch officers, Mladić finally and deliberately calms down and asks Karamins, and I quote, "What do you want? You asked for the meeting. Speak up." This is, I'll show you the transcript of what the colonel said. "I had a talk with General Nikolai 2 hours ago, and also with the national authorities about the request on behalf of the population. It's a request because I'm not in a position to demand anything. We, the command in Sarajevo, has said that the enclave has been lost." He goes on to say, and the request of the BIH command is to, let's say, to negotiate or ask for the withdrawal of the battalion and the withdrawal of those refugees, and if there are possibilities to assist that withdrawal. It's from our trial video P1147, transcript page 17. As you can see, Karamin tells Mladić that the UN command has concluded that the enclave has been lost, and he requested Mladić's approval for the withdrawal of Dutchbat and thousands of refugees in Potocari. Well, this is what I call a watershed moment. For Mladić and Karadzic, after years of efforts to remove the Muslims from eastern Bosnia, only to be prevented in 93 through 11 July by UNPROFOR. But now, UNPROFOR has given up and is requesting Mladić to allow them and the Muslim population to leave Srebrenica. Of course, Mladić has not given UNPROFOR any real choice. He had thousands of Muslim hostages, Dutch hostages, Muslims struggling to survive, no longer any military option, and no NATO. But the point I want to make to you is, with the complete surrender, Mladić is now able to focus his decision-making and resources on removing the population and dealing with the able-bodied men in Podachari and elsewhere in the enclave. We know from Mladić's main staff, Assistant Commander for Personnel, Skrbich, as I mentioned, that Mladić himself ordered buses late that night. Skrbich testified about this. 13984 to 13985. Also that evening, Mladić ordered Borovchanin to make the final assault on Podachari first thing in the morning of 12 July. See Borovchanin's report, P72. And as you'll recall, P724, excuse me. As you will recall, Borovchanin and elements of the Bratanac Brigade did make an unopposed assault on Podachari the morning of the 12th and soon controlled the Muslim population. So, with no obstacles from the UN or NATO, on the evening of July, Mladić can now look squarely at the able-bodied men that he knows are in his, that will soon be in his control. You recall the evidence. The VRS had observed those men the night of the 11th and reported it to Mladić. See paragraph 1159 of our breach. At the second Hotel Fontana meeting with the Muslim school teacher, Nezab Mladić, we see Mladić now focus on the Bosnian army, repeatedly insisting on meeting the next day with the representative of the Muslim army. After that meeting, Mladić and Krstić had dinner together at the Hotel Fontana, where they were both staying. See paragraphs 1174 and 1219 of our brief. Mladić intel officers Yankovic and Kosaric were also seen on the video at the hotel. So this is decision-making time. In the quiet, comfortable surroundings of a hotel at the end of the day, with his key people who advise him, the Muslims of Podachari had to be the main focus of the discussion. Mladić had ordered the buses that night to remove the population. And his other major immediate decision was what to do with the able-bodied men who would be in his control the next day. The next morning, at the third Hotel Fontana meeting, Mladić announced his decision to screen the able-bodied men of Podachari from 16 to 60. Thus, we know he made his decision between the late evening of 11 and the morning of 12 July. He'd made the decision about those able-bodied men to screen them. We know that from his announcement. Next, you will recall the testimony of Momir Nikolic, explaining how that morning, before the Hotel Fontana meeting, Popovich and Kosaric approached him and informed him that all the able-bodied men would be killed and they needed his assistance. See paragraph 1176 of our brief and his testimony at 11820 and 11827. Thus, the decision Mladić had made to screen the men in Podachari was in fact the decision to separate and murder them. This soon became evident when the separations began. There was never any significant screening of the men. There was a rough and sometimes violent division of males from the population, including many times boys 13 to 15, and younger and older men well over 60. The men were crowded together in inhuman conditions, in extreme heat, with no food or medicine and only enough water to sustain them. Identification documents were discarded and burned, showing Mladić had no concern for these people as prisoners of war and wanted no record of who they were. You may recall the photo of a large pile of Muslim belongings, including IDs, being burned in Podachari after 13 July. It's exhibit P1423. In their detention in nearby Bratunats, the separated men were routinely beaten and many were killed by the troops guarding them. The separations and detention in Boticari and Bratunats confirm Mladić's decision to screen the men was actually the decision to murder them. Before I go any further, I want to play to you Mladić's words at the second Hotel Fontaine meeting, because again, I think his words give away his intent. This is to Nezib Mladić.
Da bi mogao da odlučim i kao čovjek i kao komandant. Trebam da dobijem jasan stav predstavnika vašeg naroda. Da li želite da ostanete ili nestanete. I spreman sam sutra primiti delegaciju odgovornih ljudi muslimanske strane u 10 sati na ovome mjestu, sa kojima mogu razgovarati o spasu i izbavljenja vašeg naroda iz enklave, bivše enklave Srebrenice. Da li ste me razumeli? Nesibe, i u vašim rukama sudbina vašeg naroda. Ne samo na ovom prostoru.
Da sam slučajno predstavnik, ali da ja ne odgovaram na problema.
To je vaš problem. Dobijete ljude koji mogu obezbediti predaj oružja i spasti vaš narod od uništenja.
Destruction, salvation, fear. Mr. Teeger has already played for you part of the 12 July meeting where we see similar words. I won't do that again, but I will remind you of what those words are.
Is there any interpretation
Sorry.
problem?
Yeah, yes.
Yes. If there is, let's check whether. I'll speak a few words again, nothing yet.